On today's show, Drake Powell continues to impress while enjoying a rotation role early this season. I'll tell you why the Nets rookie's performance should leave fans highly encouraged right now.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to Locked On Nets right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Now the #1 sports podcast network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I'm Erik Slater, Brooklyn Nets beat reporter for ClutchPoints.com. Thank you for making me your first listen of the day. The show is 100% free on all those great platforms. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Head to FanDuel.com to get started. Now, on today's show, I'm going to be talking about Drake Powell and his encouraging start to his rookie campaign. We're coming off another high-level performance from Drake. He had 15 points off the bench in Monday's loss to the Knicks. So, want to focus on Drake's offense, which is really exceeded expectations. Then going to get into some of the defensive strengths he has flashed, and then also some other Nets news and notes involving some trade buzz and Cam Thomas's injury status to close it out. But starting off with Drake's offense. And, looking at Drake as a prospect, he was a guy that was kind of the change of pace pick or the outlier pick from what the Nets did or perceivably was, because the Nets obviously had the 5 first-round picks and 4 of those guys in Yegor Diom, Nolan Troy, and Ben Soroff, the 3-point guards. And then Danny Wolf, this big man who was kind of like this point center. They went with a lot of guys who were, good size, good positional versatility, but really like high feel on ball guys, good passers, all of that. And Drake was seen as the outlier of the group in terms of a player who is perceived as the best athlete in the draft, but was really lacking some of the ball handling, on-ball creation, self-creation, some of the things along those lines. So that was the narrative, and that's the reason why a lot of people thought or felt like the Nets reached for Drake at the 22nd pick in the draft. I mean, there were a number of draft analysts who had Drake in the low 20s, if not into the 30s in second round, and they thought that Drake was a reach at that number 22 spot. And the reason behind that narrative or that thought process was the lack of offensive, tools or skills that Drake showed at North Carolina. And early this season, Drake has kind of flipped that on its head, and he's kind of proving those retractors wrong, albeit in a very small sample size. But what Drake has done offensively, I think should leave Nets fans highly encouraged, because he's kind of answering some of those questions, or at least showing flashes and promise that some of those narratives aren't true surrounding the limitations that he has to his offensive game. And if you look at Drake, it's been 9 games since he came back from that second ankle sprain and has been a full-time member of the rotation. And in those 9 games, he's averaging 8 points, 2.3 assists to 1.3 turnovers, 49, 38, 92 shooting splits, and a little over 20 minutes per game. So, low volume, like small sample size, but the offensive efficiency has looked really good. I mean, if you talk about Drake, I said 49, 38, 92 shooting splits. That's a 62.6 true shooting percentage. That is the highest on the Nets among all non-centers. So anybody not Day'Ron Sharpe or Nick Claxton, highest true shooting percentage on the Nets. That's also the 3rd highest true shooting percentage among 14 rookie guards playing over 15 minutes per game. The only rookie guards ahead of Drake in true shooting are Will Ricard and Con Knippel. And Will Ricard's at 68 and Con Knippel is just above 65. Both of those guys playing really well. And obviously, like, Drake is only attempting 5 field goals per game, so the sample size is smaller. But when he has been given the ball in his hands, and when he has been given the ball on catch and shoots or whatever on the perimeter, the shooting, the offensive feel, all of it has looked really good, and honestly better than I was expecting, and a lot of draft analysts seem to be expecting. You talk about the offensive questions after the draft. I mean, a lot of it stemmed from, I've said it, the lack of usage that Drake showed at North Carolina. Drake had a 13% usage rate last season as a freshman, and that was the lowest among any wing ever to get drafted. And you can say, like, that was the role. Like, he had a lot of ball-dominant guys around him at North Carolina. That's what, Coach Brown in North Carolina wanted him to do, and all that might be true. But, like, when it's that low, there are perceivably some offensive limitations. So those were the questions. And I really had 2 questions about Drake offensively after the draft, just looking at his prospect profile. The first one was, is the jump shooting real? Because he shot around 38% from 3 last year at North Carolina on really low volume. So was that real? And then secondly, does he have a baseline of NBA ball handling and decision-making skills that you can build off of? Because you look at Drake, if he has that outside shooting, and then you look at the athleticism, I mean, over 42-inch max vertical. He was a really good finisher at the rim, in the half-court cutter and transition play finisher. So if you have the outside shooting and you have that athleticism where you think you can be a rim finisher and some of those things along those lines and play in transition, the next question is just, do you have the ball handling? Do you have the stuff to be a secondary creator? Can you play with him on the second side? Can you put the ball in his hands, and can he do something late in the shot clock? And if you have that, or a baseline of that to build on from, along with a decent outside shooting profile and the athleticism that Drake has, that's the profile of at least a decent offensive player, you would think. And then you couple that with the elite defensive tools that he had, and you're talking about some legit two-way upside. So talking about those two things, I mean, I said first, the jump shooting, it's looked good so far with the Nets. I mean, he has shot 38% from three. He's only taking 5 per 100 possessions, but that's almost identical to Drake's college stats. Like, he was 38% from three last year on a little bit over 5 per 100 possessions. And I think that, carrying that over almost identical, they're still good numbers. And I'd say with the 3-point line moving back, with the step up or the huge step up in competition, I'd say that's all a positive. And you look at outside of the 3-point shooting, I mean, he's shooting 50% from the mid-range, which is a lot better than I was expecting. Obviously, really small sample size, but it's looked smooth on a variety of different shots from three and from the mid-range. He's actually shot better off the dribble, which I wasn't expecting because he barely took any pull-up shots at North Carolina. Drake shooting 46% off the dribble, and he's shooting 36% on catch and shoot threes. So you like to see that catch and shoot number go up, but both of those numbers, I'm not mad at that. If you talk about the jump shooting and whether or not it's going to be real moving forward, him being able to do that as a rookie, I think is really encouraging, especially after he battled an injury and didn't do a lot of stuff for a lot of the offseason. So that was really nice to see. And then also the on-ball creation. That has been the most surprising thing that Drake has done, because we've seen him flash some legit on-ball creation chops, and the Nets have put the ball in his hands a lot. We know that the Nets are playing with Yegor Dioman and Tyrese Martin as point guards. Yegor Dioman's a player that a lot of people are questioning whether he's going to be a point guard long-term. Tyrese Martin has never been a point guard throughout his NBA career. So you're talking about two guys who obviously there are serious, questions or limitations there. So with that, Drake has gotten the ball in his hands a lot more than I think a lot of people were expecting. And he's looked good in the reps. Like, he's had some legitimate flashes, some legitimate takes to the rim. He's shown the in-between game, as I said, shooting 50% from the mid-range. We've seen, like, you look at some of the three-point shots, like Drake has hit a couple of three-point shots or multiple three-point shots where he's hitting sidestep or step-back threes. Like, that was not something that I thought he was going to have in his bag at this point, given what he did or what he didn't do at North Carolina, which was pretty much never shooting off the dribble from three. And then you talk about the mid-range, like, Drake has worked into the mid-range and looked comfortable in that area. He's hit some floaters. He had a shot against the Knicks where he kind of worked into the mid-range late in the shot clock, and he took he was kind of turned away from the basket, and he jumped up, kind of did a spin move and then jumped up and turned his body slightly in the air to square his shoulders up to the basket and hit the shot. And it's just like stuff like that. I'm, pretty surprised that he's making plays like that. And I know that, like, Drake was a 5-star recruit. He did a lot of this stuff during, his senior season in high school when you look at that, but he was also, for the most part, just dominating people in terms of his athleticism and physicality. Because if you go back to his high school tape, he is a guy who was 6'5", 7-foot wingspan, over 40-inch vertical, really strong. Like, when you have that level of physical tools, you're just going to overpower people at the high school level. And that's what he did a lot of the time. But now, getting up to, the NBA level, he's flashed being able to be comfortable with the ball in his hands and doing some of this stuff off the dribble, also off the catch. So all of that is really positive. And then, in the brief, like, pick and roll reps that Drake has gotten, he's shown some flashes of being able to read the floor and make some passes, which isn't that surprising, because if you look at Drake's tape from North Carolina and you listen to what people said about him, he was always regarded as, like, not a high feel or pass first, player in the sense of a Yegor Dioman or Danny Wolf or Nolan Troy or Ben Saraf, but he was viewed as a guy who consistently made the right play, kept the ball moving, was not a ball stopper, knew how to play within an offense, was willing to accept a role. So it's not surprising to me that Drake has an understanding of how to do some of these things. And it shouldn't be surprising, because if you watched the Nets Scout Series, where their front office was taking you inside some of their meetings. One of their scouts, who was primarily, looking at Drake and spending time watching him and being around him, one of the things he said was, you need to be able to do it mentally, you need to be able to do it physically. And Drake is able to do it in both ways. And that's clearly thought. Then in addition to the freakish physical tools that Drake had, that he has it between the ears as well. And I think that that's showing up in his approach, his humility, and also like some of the things that he's doing on the ball is a little bit ahead of where I was expecting it to be based on his lack of reps. But if you have that understanding, you can pick stuff up and process it at a higher level. So all of that, Drake's outside shooting, his, on-ball creation and ball handling being ahead of where it is, and then also the understanding of the game and processing. And are there still going to be moments where it's ugly? Sure. Like he's going to have some turnovers, some bad plays. But for a player who did as little as he did at North Carolina, I think that this has been a resounding positive early in the season. And it's really answered a lot of the questions that people had, or at least been the beginning of answering a lot of the questions that people had. He's going to have to sustain it and do it longer now. But really positive stuff. And that's before we even touch on the defensive end of the floor, which is going to be Drake's main strength, or is going to be a major strength of his, using all of the tools that he has. So what have I seen from him on that end, and what should fans be looking for moving forward? We'll get into all that when I continue Locked On Nets after a quick break. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed the start of a game or just want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team is making that late push. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Coming back from the break, continuing today's Locked On Nets episode, talking about Drake Powell and his encouraging start to the season, and want to get into the defense now, because that was obviously viewed as the main strength of Drake during his freshman season at North Carolina. You look at people talk, you listen to people talk about him, and they say that he was just a different cat as a freshman, and on the defensive end of the floor, in terms of what he could do physically, in terms of what he could do mentally, all that. Like you look at, the North Carolina Duke matchups last year, where Drake is playing against guys like Cooper Flagg, Con Knippel, Tyrese Proctor, like really high-level prospects. And some people said that they don't think anybody in the country guarded those guys as well as Drake Powell did during those matchups. So that was the main selling point of Drake. Clearly the Nets thought that he was going to be an elite defensive prospect using, all the physical gifts that he has. And they felt that his offensive tools were at a baseline where they felt like they could build forward with that. And he had room for growth, room for development, and it could get to an NBA level. And I think Drake has shown that offensively. And the defensive end of the floor, I said entering the year, all of these Nets rookies, I was just going to be looking for, do their main strengths play at the NBA level? Do they look like they stick out at the NBA level? And for Drake, a lot of that is the physical stuff, the athleticism, the tools, and then also how he's able to move and how he's able to understand things on the defensive end of the floor. And I think we're seeing that early this season, especially physically. Like, you're not going to see many more NBA rookies who just walk in and stand out physically and athletically the way that Drake has. We've listened to Jordy Fernandez talk about it throughout the season. He talks about Drake and he says, like, Drake just moves different. If you look at the way that he moves around the court, it's different. And I completely agree in terms of, obviously, like, the straight line speed is elite. Obviously, the explosive athleticism, like, he was towards the top in the combine testing. In 3/4 court sprint, he would have the highest max vertical leap in the combine and the 14th highest in the history of the combine. And you look at it, it's not just that, though. It's also the way he's able to flip his hips, the way he's able to move, the way he's able to stop and plan and get from point A to point B with the change of direction and then his straight line speed. Like, you look at it, there was a play against the Orlando Magic that I posted on Twitter during that game where Drake was their Nets were in rotation, because they're always in rotation, because they're always playing at the level and scram switching and doing stuff on the back end. But Drake was there. He was like getting towards the nail, the middle of the free throw line, and he was halfway in a rotation. And then the Magic skipped past it to the corner. And it was Drake realized that he had to X out and get all the way to the corner. He planted. He covered like 15 feet in the blink of an eye, got Desmond Bane to pump fake instead of taking the corner three. Then he stayed with him, and then he, off the dribble, he stuck with him. He forced him to force a pass late in the shot clock. Somebody gets a hand on it. It turns into a turnover. So that's just an example of what I'm talking about. His ability to change direction, his ability to close out, stop on a dime, stay with guys, slide his feet, all of that. Another play against the Boston Celtics in that surprise win up in Boston where you see the length play, like I said, 7-foot wingspan. The Celtics tried to make kind of like a skip pass, lazy cross-court pass. Drake gets a hand on it. He tips it out. He gets to the ball. He goes down the court, and he dunks over Anthony Simons the other end. And it's just like plays like that. We just don't see plays like that often. Like a Nets defender getting in a passing lane, getting a steal, going down, and dunking over somebody in transition on a play where Drake took off. It seemed like 10 feet away from the basket and still dunked it. And that just speaks to the athleticism. And that's what I'm really excited about with Drake. And I think that all Nets fans should be excited about, because if you just look at the Nets throughout this Brooklyn era and really throughout their history, I mean, a little bit more in the Jersey days, they were a little bit more athletic. But since they've come to Brooklyn, they have been a very unathletic team for the most part. Like we know a lot of the Brooklyn era, it was the rebuild, the restart, and then it was the, KD, Kyrie, Harden. But you look at it like that spunky first team, like it was led by guys like D'Angelo Russell, Joe Harris, like, guys along those lines, obviously Spencer Dinwiddie, other guys like not elite athletes, not very physically imposing. And then you get to the KD, Kyrie, Harden era, and it was really just like their offensive brilliance carrying the way. And the Nets supporting pieces were not elite athletes by any stretch of the imagination. It was a lot of three-point shooters. It was a lot of like high field players, but not guys that could impose their will on other players physically. And if you look at it, just like who are the elite athletes, like the really eye-popping athletes that we've seen throughout Nets history? I mean, like if we're talking about, since the turn of the century, like obviously Vince Carter is in that conversation, like non-centers, I think Kenyon Martin, obviously, but like guards, like what Drake Powell is, Vince Carter's in that conversation. Yeah, guys like Gerald Green, was in that conversation, like Gerald Wallace, a little bit more of a forward, but he was a pretty athletic dude. Markel Brown, if you guys remember him, like Markel Ovation, Nets took him in the second round back in the early 2010s. Like he was a pretty athletic guy, but didn't really have any of the other tools or the size or the offensive stuff that Drake has flashed. So in terms of just athleticism, as I said, guys who can play with force and physically impose their will on other players, there haven't been that many of them. And the Nets got one in the first round in Drake Powell, who I think that fans should be really excited about, because like Gerald Green, good player, had that unbelievable windmill dunk, but like wasn't a Nets first round pick, was really more of a journeyman. Markel Brown, second round pick, really athletic, but really didn't have anything else to his game. You're getting this player in Drake Powell who has all of that athleticism and more, and is also showing some promising signs in terms of what he's able to do on both ends of the floor early in his career. So that to me is the most exciting part of this. And it's really kind of a break from what we've seen from a lot of the prospects that the Nets have brought in. Because if you go through the draft, there really aren't many really athletic prospects during the Sean Marks era. And Drake is bucking that trend. And hopefully, if he can continue to develop offensively, if his defensive understanding gets to where the Nets think it can, I think that he has a chance to be a really high-level player for this Nets team, a two-way player for this Nets team, which is something that not a lot of draft analysts thought entering June's draft. So that's what I got on Drake. I'm going to close it out after a quick break. I got some stuff on some Nets trade rumors. Friend of the pod, Mike Scotto, had a report. Also, Cam Thomas, where are we at with his injury update, and what should fans be expecting moving forward? All that and more when I close out Locked On Nets after a quick break. The NBA season is heating up, and DoorDash has found the perfect way to keep fans in their bag all season long. Whether you're watching for the highlights, your fantasy team, or just your favorite player, DoorDash makes every game night even better. DoorDash is the official on-demand delivery platform of the NBA, and they're celebrating with something called the bag drop. Every time an NBA player scores 50 points in a game, DoorDash drops 50% off your order with Dash Pass the next day, and you're automatically entered for a chance to win the ultimate fan bag. We're talking player-inspired drip, exclusive gear, and stuff you'll actually want. So DoorDash has you covered for late-night highlights, last-minute watch parties, and double OT fuel ups. So next time someone goes off for 50, use promo code NBA50 the next day to get 50% off on DoorDash with Dash Pass, plus your shot at the bag drop. Dash Pass members only, 50% off up to $10 the day after a 50-point game with promo code. Terms apply. No purchase necessary. Ends April 13th. Open to U.S. residents 21 or older. Visit DoorDashInYourBag.com for full details. DoorDash, in your bag all season long. Coming back from the break, closing out today's Locked On Nets episode, got some trade speculation and some trade rumors. Friend of the pod, Mike Scotto over at Hoops Hype, reported this, that the Nets and the Boston Celtics have had some trade discussions involving Anthony Simons, and this is exactly what Scotto said. Over the summer, the Brooklyn Nets and Celtics discussed several trade scenarios involving Simons that ultimately fell through, league sources told Hoops Hype. So just want to touch on this briefly. I'm actually going to have Scotto on the pod, and I'm doing a Fan Take Friday episode this week. So on both of those episodes, I'm going to touch on this at length. But this has been known. Like, Scotto's reporting this. It's good to hear, but like, it's not necessarily breaking news in the sense that everybody knew that like any team who was looking to shed salary this past summer called the Nets, because the Nets were the only team with significant cap space. So they were the only team, one of the only teams in position to take on a significant salary like Anthony Simons. And you look at this, like I've talked about this on prior pods, that I think that there's a really good chance that the Nets and Celtics could be trade partners involving Anthony Simons, because the whole theme of the Celtics offseason was shedding salary, and they did shed salary, you know, with trading Drew Holiday, getting Simons, some other moves. But the Celtics are still $12 million over the luxury tax, and they are going to be motivated to duck under the first apron and under the luxury tax in order to reset the repeater tax, which is like if you're in the luxury tax for 3+ years in a row, you get into something called the repeater tax, where every dollar that you pay in tax is compounded like exponentially the higher over the tax you go. And if you get out of that for a couple of seasons, you can reset the repeater tax. And that is big for a team, you know, in this apron era who's trying to build out their roster moving forward. And because of that, if you asked me one Nets transaction that I was most confident was going to go down, you know, this season, it would be something involving Anthony Simons at the trade deadline. It would also be a Cam Thomas trade. Those two trades, I think that those could be one trade. I'll talk about that in a second. But just like getting off of Simons, the Nets taking that expiring contract, and that's big because Simons is an expiring contract. So the Nets could take that on. They could help the Celtics get out of the luxury tax. They can get an asset back, and then they'd be no worse off for wear. They'd actually, you know, could actually open up some more cap space on their books if they trade a contract that's beyond this year and not an expiring, a smaller one. So I just think it makes too much sense for both sides from that perspective. And just briefly touching on the numbers, like Simons is making roughly $27.7 million. As I said, the Celtics need to shed roughly $12.1 million to get under the luxury tax, and the Nets have roughly $15.3 million in cap space. So if you work out the numbers there's a window between all of that where the Nets can, you know, make a deal. They can stay under the salary cap, and the Celtics can get under the luxury tax. And that window is, if the Nets send out salary in the trade, one or multiple players, between $12.4 million and $15.6 million, that's the window. Anything in between that can keep the Nets under the salary cap, which they need to make the trade unless they use an exception. Also, that gets the Celtics under the luxury tax. And that number, you know, $12.4 million to $15.6 million, the Nets have a lot of mid-sized contracts that they can use to make that happen. They have 4 players in Cam Thomas, Day'Ron Sharpe, Zaire Williams, and Haywood Highsmith, all making around $66 million. So, you know, 2 of those guys packaged, that could get you there. You also have Terrence Mann's contract at $15.5 million. That might not be as likely, but that's 5 players right there that the Nets could use to, you know, get into that window to help the Celtics get under the luxury tax, take back Simons. He's an expiring contract. It doesn't hamstring you anything beyond this year, and you could potentially get back an asset. The Celtics have a lot of first-round picks moving forward. They have their own. They have a really juicy second-round pick in this coming year's draft. So I definitely think that there could be something there. I'm going to get into it maybe on the Fan Take Friday, maybe on the episode with Scotto early next week about potential specific trades that we could see happening. But last thing I want to close out is just a Cam Thomas update, or really a non-Cam Thomas update. It's been exactly 3 weeks today since Cam Thomas hurt his hamstring, and the Nets said on November 7th, they said that Cam was going to be reevaluated in 3 to 4 weeks. So we're just about at that 3-week mark. And Jordy was asked about it today at Nets practice, and he said that there was no update on Cam Thomas. So, that probably is a sign that it's going to be a little bit longer that Cam Thomas is going to be out, because if we're at the 3-week mark, they said 3 to 4 weeks, there's no update, probably not expecting an update for like another week or so. And then at that point, when there is an update, like Cam is going to need a couple of weeks to ramp up before they bring him back from a hamstring injury. So we're at 3 weeks now. I would not be at all surprised. I would say it is actually likely at this point that we're probably looking at another 3 weeks at least, if not more. And that puts you beyond the December 15th date where Cam Thomas and all the other free agents who signed this past summer are ready or eligible to be traded. So, I did a whole episode on this with Brian Lewis. Brian talked to a doctor out in California who was really well-known around the sports world in the NBA. We talked about, has Cam Thomas played his last game as a Brooklyn Net? I've hit on this several times. So with this lack of an injury update, it's looking like it's going to be a little bit before he can get back on the court beyond that December 15th date. And with the way the Nets are playing, with the way that, Yegor Dioman has looked improved, Drake Powell has looked improved, Noah Clowney is having a breakout stint. All of these things that have developed with these other guys getting more on-ball opportunities with Cam Thomas out of the lineup, and the Nets just playing a more team-oriented and a more spread out, style of attack instead of Cam Thomas, posting a 30 to 40% usage on most nights. I'm just not sure, how much sense it makes or how likely it is that Cam Thomas is going to be back in the lineup. But we'll have some more updates on Cam hopefully soon. Hopefully he can get back healthy, and we'll see how the Nets handle it. Do they bring him back? Is he a part of a trade? We'll see. I'll have plenty of reporting on Clutch Points and here on Locked On Nets on that. But that's all I got for you on today's episode. If you guys do not already, make sure to subscribe to Locked On Nets on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts, whether Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you enjoy the content, take a second, smash that like button, leave a comment, leave a 5-star review. Anything you can do to engage is much appreciated. But I hope you all have a happy, healthy Thanksgiving. Enjoy some NBA basketball, enjoy some NFL football, enjoy stuffing your faces with your family. And then the Nets are going to be back at Barclays Center on Friday, and they got an exciting slate of games the following week. So I'll have coverage of all that and more when I'm back tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.